Hello and welcome to the Hibs Observer Thursday afternoon briefing with myself, Liam Bryce, joined again by Patrick McPartlin as we look over all things Hibs from this week and heading into the weekend. Obviously, Hibs away up at Ross County and Dingwall, 4 games to go until the end of the Premiership season. So we'll touch on that and plenty else. But in the meantime, Patrick, how are we? Good to have you back.
It's good to be back. Noted that Hibs managed to win a game quite comfortably in my absence.
Yep.
Not taking this personally, at least trying not to. And obviously another trip to Dingwall doesn't feel like so long ago that we were last up there. But also just on a personal note, interesting to see if they can actually manage to come up with a win. This time, I have been to Dingle 3 times to cover Hibs games, and 3 times they have come away without a victory. So hopefully a case of 4th time lucky for myself, but obviously also for Hibs. Quite good if they could build on a good result last weekend, carry that into this weekend. So good to be back in the saddle and looking forward to hopefully another 3 points.
Sounds like you're due a victory in Dingwall, and I can't think of a better place to start after a week off. Absolutely ideal, right up to the Highlands, straight back into it. Before we crack on, folks, just a quick word for our sponsors. Thrilled to have Weissman, a global leader in the boiler industry, known for their top-notch German engineering. They've teamed up with Scotland's very own award-winning installation team, MPH Boilers, making it a perfect match right here in Scotland. Weissman's boilers are engineered to deliver not just warmth, but unparalleled efficiency and reliability. Cutting-edge technology designed to save you on your energy bills and reduce emissions as well. And with MPH Boilers, you're getting service from the best in the business, a local team committed to excellence and customer satisfaction. When you choose a Weissman boiler installed by MPH Boilers, you also get a free internet controller, so you can manage your heating anytime, anywhere, and you're also getting the first year's service free. It's all about giving you peace of mind and making sure that you're looked after. So if your boiler's showing its age or you're considering an upgrade, this is your chance to get world-class engineering with local expert service. Weissman and MPH Boilers, it's a match made in Scotland. Make sure you check them out and take the first step towards a warmer, more efficient home. So I'm going to start today. We heard from Nick Montgomery yesterday, just talking about the potential for a really high amount of ins and outs at Easter Road this summer. He has said already that his focus, I think, in terms of incomings will be on quality. Sorry, I nearly got that the wrong way around. Quality over quantity. But I think it's, I think just naturally with the amount of players you would probably expect to be going out the door, that there will at least be a fair amount coming in. So he said that that new homes will have to be found for some players. You'd imagine this is guys perhaps coming to the end of contracts, guys who are coming back from loans who aren't expected to make really any contribution moving forward. Also set a bit of a challenge to the guys that are in the building at the moment to prove that they want to be at Hibs next season. So what did you make of the manager's comments, Patrick? He certainly seems to be teeing up a fair amount of transition to come over the next few weeks and indeed months.
Yeah, I don't think it was a great surprise, really. Anything that he said, when you look at the number of players that Hibs have on their books, the first team squad and those are out on loan. I mean, 19 players out on loan. It's kind of verging into kind of Chelsea territory.
Yeah, it's almost a whole other squad, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's just a kind of byproduct of the fact that Hibs have had this managerial churn over the last sort of 4 to 5 years, and you've just got a kind of collection of players, some who've been brought in by one manager and not fancied by another, or maybe haven't been fancied by one manager, but then they get a kind of resurgence under a new head coach, and then on top of that you've got youngsters who might not be getting offered new deals, or as you say, people come to the end of their contracts. And I think one of the main problems for Hibs is because they had this sort of development squad idea. I think that was brought in during Sean Maloney's tenure. I think they're kind of feeling the after effects of that a little bit, which I think probably fair to say it was a nice idea in theory, and in practice it just really hasn't worked the way that they would want it to. It's the kind of thing that you'd want to bring in if the team's been performing well, if they've been finishing third consistently, and maybe after you've had an injection of cash like they're getting this summer from Bill Foley and the Black Knights. But I just think, the bringing it in when they did, it kind of lumbered Hibs with a lot of players who probably weren't quite ready to be playing week in, week out in the Scottish Premiership, but were probably too good to be playing, just reserve games. And you do have this sort of collection of players now, some of whom, are not going to be anywhere near the first team squads, who, are kind of so far from the first team picture that it's there's going to be a lot of juggling going on. It's can Hibs, can they make the moves they need to in terms of bringing players in, and can they also get some players off the books? There's players who need to go and play regular football. There's players who, they could stick around, they could head out on loan again, but I think whatever the story is with the individual players, there's going to be a heck of a lot of comings and goings, and I think it's probably what the team or what the squad needs. And I think it will also give us a chance to see what Nick Montgomery is really capable of doing with a squad of his own players, rather than I've used this phrase before, but a kind of Frankenstein squad of players from a clutch of various managers, and there's a fair few loans in there as well. So I think summer always seems to be a busy time anyway when it comes to football. But I think for Hibs, this one particularly will be I think probably one of the biggest we've seen in the last few years, if not the biggest. So I think it'll be interesting just to see exactly what happens in terms of ins and outs over the summer months.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite something in itself, that it could be the biggest yet, considering the amount. The past few summers have been pretty significant in of themselves. And just a quick one on his comments, not so much about finding new homes for players, but the comments kind of saying that there's a chance now over these next 4 games for guys to show that they want to be at Easter Road next season. So that kind of, to me, suggests that he's maybe unsure about. Maybe, I don't know how many, but I mean, there's certainly some uncertainty about guys who are perhaps been playing and are contracted as to whether they're going to play any part next season. I imagine there's going to be several positions where he's going to want to look to bring in a player of his own choosing, really.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think every football manager, or most football managers, are the same. That they're going to say something like that. They're not going to. I don't think they're going to say anything to the contrary. Obviously there's still 4 games to go. Nick Montgomery is aware that there's a very good chance that he could be. I suppose his own future is maybe still up in the air a little bit with that Black Knights review that's kind of been carried out as per the statement from the Hibs board a couple of weeks back. So I think from his own point of view, and just from a point of view of just finishing the season on a relative high. I mean, obviously, you're not finishing the season on a high because you've finished in the bottom 6. But if you can, win sort of like the last 5 games, put in good performances, then it maybe goes some way to bringing back a little bit of the feel-good factor. Obviously, not remotely close to what it could be, but better than nothing. And I think that Montgomery's going to be aware that he needs to get sort of same level of performance out of these players that he got on Saturday for the remaining 4 games. And I think that, it's very possible as well he'll be saying something different to them behind closed doors. But I think publicly you say that to, maybe to sort of tease a little bit more out your players, maybe keep them guessing, and just try and ensure that you're getting performances out of these players right up until the final day of the season. I just think it's not unusual in football that there could be, a player and a decision's been made, but then something happens and, situation changes, and, it could be a reference to that. It could be, there's still, as you say, just still some players who, might still be a bit undecided. I mean, on one level, you'd say he's been here for the bulk of an entire season. I know it's not been his players for, that full time. Obviously brought in some of his own players in January, but I still wonder whether there's some players who, like, for example, Josh Campbell, well under contract, but just somebody who's maybe not featured as much under Montgomery because of his injury. It just might be a reference to things like that, where he just wants to really see, what they can do in the final 4 games, when in some senses the pressure's off, for the wrong reasons, but just to sort of see what they can bring. And it's not so much about whether they're going to stay or whether they're going to go, but what kind of role they might play next season, and then that presumably has an effect on the the types of players they would look to bring in that sense. So I think it's probably quite a clever thing to say. It's one of those kind of man management things where you maybe say something like that so that any players who have that doubt sort of think, oh, maybe there's still a chance, or it's just there's I think it could be many sort of reasons behind why he said what he said. But I think, certainly having obviously wasn't there. I've watched the game back, from Perth, and I just think that there's not really any signs of any of the players, kind of downing tools or being on the beach already. The usual cliches. I think there's still, a lot of players there who feel they've kind of got a bit of a point to prove, or just want to put in performances, out of pride more than anything else. I think they know how, that they fell short in trying to get into the top six. They know that they're the number of performances where they lost late goals, and with them points, as you've covered on the site recently, is something that needs to change. So I think it'll be interesting to see the last 4 games if there is maybe a little bit of a noticeable change in how some players are performing, or the team as a whole.
Yeah, aye, and obviously that continues up at Dingwall on Saturday, as we touched on. Again, it's the kind of the pressure is off in a way, but then I think obviously Paul Hanlon did his interview after the game last week and said, well, it's not really in a sense, because you're kind of always being judged here, and I think certainly given the events of the season, this squad and this manager are still being judged. But you do wonder kind of if there will be any sort of level of change in how Montgomery chooses to go about things over the last few games. No, I don't expect any great deal of change in terms of how he approaches set up and whatnot, but just in terms of different players perhaps getting an opportunity to show what they can do. Obviously, young players coming into the squad was a kind of real feature of things earlier on in the season. Some of that through necessity, some of it through, well, all of it to an extent at least. Young boys are shown that they deserve a chance to come in and fill gaps across the squad. So you kind of wonder if with the ones that are still in and around the club who haven't gone out on loan, if there is maybe a wee bit of scope over the next few weeks for young guys to get a chance. This tends to be the time of the season where that will happen, doesn't it? It's like last few games you start to see 1 or 2 names appearing in squad lists. I'm just wondering, with the current predicament, current situation, whether you think we'll see much of that, if any at all.
I think there's probably a likelihood. I think if Hibs were in a situation where they were trying to stave off, a relegation battle, then I think you'd probably not see it happening unless it was absolutely necessary. Possibly as well, if they were in the top 6, if they were going for a European spot, you might not necessarily see it. But I just sort of think, aside from that, like Montgomery seems a little bit different. That he's used young players in big games. Again, sometimes out of necessity, but there's also the argument that there's been certain games that he's played young players in, and he could very well have used a senior player, but just sort of pulled him slightly out of position. And I don't think he's the sort of manager who's scared to sort of put a young player in. You can debate whether that's the right approach for you or the wrong approach. I know a lot of fans, maybe a bit uncertain about some of the games that youngsters were handed starts in, just the sort of, the magnitude of the occasion. But again, the caveat is it was June, January. There were players on international duty. There were players who were injured. They hadn't, got players in during the transfer window yet. So, there was that sort of element of necessity. But, I still think, you just look at players like, Jacob McIntyre, somebody who's been involved recently, and, not out on loan. So, a possibility that he can, he might be involved. You've seen, players like Josh Landers involved earlier in the season, and you're not sort of really losing anything by giving them sort of more experience with the first team. And I think the difference this time is that if Montgomery does bring them on, it's not going to feel like a kind of token young players getting 15-20 minutes at the end of the season. I think if they were going to be playing, they'd be playing because Montgomery trusts them to do a job. Because at the end of the day, like we were saying just a minute ago, there is still this sort of element that the players are being judged, that the management, the coaching staff are being judged, and there's not going to be any. I don't think there's going to be any knee-jerk decisions. I don't think Montgomery's the kind of manager who does that. But at the same time, he's also the kind of manager who would say, well, I'm not letting something like this distract me from the way I would manage anyway. So I think very, very possible we might see one or two youngsters making the matchday squad between now and the end of the season. But I think important to stress that if they do, they're not just going to be there, for a kind of token gesture. It'll be because they're able to contribute and because Montgomery trust them to come on and to do a job on the pitch in whatever position that is.
Yeah, and you just, again, that we've kind of phrases come up a few times already. We've said like this kind of aspect of being judged, and so like again in his comments this week, Nick Montgomery mentioned the kind of review, the Black Knights review, everything that's ongoing. He spoke about it a few times. Obviously, you kind of probably didn't get a chance to sort of comment on that last week when he brought it up at the presser, but then just the fact that he's brought it up again this week. In terms of that, though, he's not. I mean, I'm not saying for a second that he's been dismissive of it in any way, or he's not, given it any, the sort of gravitas that it deserves. But he does. I don't know about you, but for me, he does seem fairly relaxed about the whole situation, and that it's not. He's not really. I mean, who knows what happens behind closed doors? But he's not like kind of portraying it as after the failure to make the top six, that he was dragged up and in front of the head teacher almost to explain himself. It's not. He's kind of stressed that this is a sort of very much an ongoing thing. He's kind of suggested that it's been ongoing, or even confirmed really, since even before the outcome with the top six. And I think when it was either forgive me, it was either when we had Craig or Matty on last week, you were kind of discussing it of the mind that you kind of think that this review would be happening either way. If a couple of points either side of the top six wouldn't make any great deal of difference as to whether this needs to be carried out. And certainly what he said over the past week is it's sort of backed that sense up in a way, and that it is a totally ongoing thing. It'll keep going towards the end of the season. It's been going on for some time already. So, I mean, just kind of from your perspective, having not been around last week, what have you made and how he's approached it in general and how he's addressed it?
I think he's probably addressed it exactly like I thought he would. I think I think the kind of guy he is, like, we've said this before, that he's never really too up or too down, no matter what happens. I mean, I think the one time that I've seen, certainly in in pre or post match press conferences, the one time that I've seen a bit more kind of emotion to him was after the Motherwell game at Fir Park, when there was another late goal conceded, and that kind of did for Hibs' top six hopes. That was sort of like the first real time I think that saw him sort of properly scunnered by the result. And apart from that, I think he's been quite sort of he's quite level-headed. He's quite kind of stoic sort of guy. I just think that, I mean, you can totally understand the whole, we discussed this on previous videos, previous podcasts, the whole idea of the board issuing that statement. You understand why they did it, to sort of appease the fans who were understandably, a bit browned off and not making the top six. Although, as we've discussed as well, there is this sort of kind of concerning level of apathy amongst some sections of the fan base. But you could understand if Montgomery felt maybe a little bit hung out to dry by the statement, because it was, I mean, obviously he's the manager, and he would say, I think he has actually said this word for word, that he said, when you're a manager, like, you're fighting for your job every week. And he's obviously got a point. You are fighting for your job, every time you play a game. And I think certainly in the modern day era, it's got a lot, sort of, especially at Hibs, it's sort of, more so than it used to be. That there is this sense of, if there is a bad run of form, then there's going to be questions about the manager's future. There's going to be questions about their suitability for the role.
Yeah, there's
going to be comments about having lost a dressing room, this, that, and the next thing. I just think he just seems like someone, and maybe this is kind of what the Hibs board were aiming for when they appointed him, was just somebody who's just going to be a sort of very kind of level-headed presence no matter what's going on. Now, we've seen him on the touchline during games. He can, I think there's an angry man in there sometimes. There certainly can be. But, the way he sort of approached it is just this sort of very kind of middle of the road, yeah, this is going on. I'm just getting on with my job. Whatever happens, happens. I think the way he's been speaking about the squad in the summer, that to me suggests a man who maybe isn't feeling too worried about his future. For all, as you say, we don't know what goes on behind closed doors. For all we know, there is sort of a leaning to, keeping him in role, partly so that the Black Knights can sort of get a feel for how, the club is kind of how the club's going without having to worry about there being another managerial, hunt and subsequent appointment.
Yeah.
And I think, Montgomery's been saying this since day one that, he knows that it's a big job at Hibs. It feels to him like a bit of a project. And, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about, there being this collection of players from various managers. And, I think you need someone to just be given time who, can sort of do something of a clear out, bring in players who, can sort of play the way that he wants them to play, and then hopefully they play good football, they get into Europe, etc., which is where the club, the latter stages of cup competitions, where the club wants to be on, a sort of consistent basis. But, on the flip side of that, even if he didn't know what was happening with his future, I think he'd still be exactly the same. I think he's just the kind of guy who, I've got a job to do and I'm going to do that job to the best of my ability, no matter what. So I think, it's very difficult to sort of tell what he's thinking or how he's feeling. I know he did sort of refer to the statement as emotional, which I think was, maybe betrayed slightly his feelings about it. But, I do think, I do think he said what he would have said anyway, regardless of the situation.
Yeah.
I don't think I've been too surprised by any of it. And, if the board to come out and say, like, we are doing this review, it does feel a little bit unusual. But as you say, it's the sort of thing that would have been going on anyway. It's the sort of thing that probably goes on all the time at every club. And it's maybe just the fact that you've got the Black Knights coming on board in the summer and you've got representatives on the board, and there is this sort of interest about, I think about the investment itself, and then the fact that they're involved in the review. I think it's,
it created an extra kind of level to it, didn't it? Rather than just kind of standard, than just a kind of standard end of season performance review, didn't it? It is probably the main. I mean, aside from the results, but it is the main reason why it's maybe taken on a sort of greater significance, isn't it? Just this kind of looming external third party factor, do you know?
Yeah, and I think just because of the nature of the season and because of, like I was saying about that apathy, that I think a lot of fans are probably just, quite keen to sort of clutch on to, anything that sort of sounds vaguely positive. So, like, the investment is obviously the big thing, and the Black Knights involvement and just what that will mean for the club, not just in a financial sense, but just in the sense of, kind of sharing data and best practices and stuff like that. So I think it's normal that people would be hanging on to something like that, and I suppose just sort of looking at that as like, I don't know, can we say the big thing to focus on until obviously you've got the transfer activity in the summer once the season's out of the way.
Yeah, I mean, it's the big story off the pitch, really, isn't it? It's kind of understandably exciting and at times a wee bit uncertain for fans and everybody involved. But yeah, I think for now, folks, I think we've covered everything today. Relatively short and sweet one from the two of us, but it's that time of the week, isn't it? It's almost Friday, so you can forgive us. Speaking of Friday is press conference day at HTC, so keep an eye on the website from tomorrow afternoon for your squad and injury updates from Nick Montgomery, and then a fuller interview with the manager and one of the players from 10:30 p.m. tomorrow night. Until then, though, if I'm going to give a shameless plug to our interview with Nathan Maya Welsh from earlier in the week, had the kind of absolute pleasure of sitting down with young Nathan up at HTC last Friday, and it was great just to kind of hear kind of where he's came from in football. He's kind of had a difficult, bumpy road. Released 3 times from different clubs. I think he was signed for Chelsea when he was 9 years old. Kind of bounced around Reading, Brentford. Didn't get interest in him from QPR. Considered going to America until he eventually landed at Bournemouth via a stint back at Sunday League. So there's kind of all that in there. His decision to represent Guyana in international football through his kind of family ties, what that means to him, kind of the experience of getting out and playing in all these exotic places. He's only 22 and he's already captained the team as well. So some really kind of good stories from him in there. And then the obvious one, obviously, would be remiss not to interview a Hibs player and not talk about Hibs. So there's plenty in there about Hibs as well, how he's found it so far. Nick Montgomery, the kind of just everything. From his kind of time at the club so far. So if you haven't checked that out yet, you can. That's for subscribers only. So if you're not already one of those who have signed up, I can just direct you to the ticker at the bottom of the screen handily there. It's currently a £4 for 4 months offer to get access to all of our content, or if you so desire, it's £18 for the entire year, which, if my maths are correct, it works out at roughly £1.50 a month.
I think it works out as exactly £1.50.
Exactly £1. See,
yes.
That's why I failed higher maths. That is exactly why I failed higher maths. So all of that on the website. We've got more coming as well, so do urge you to check that out. If you're watching us on YouTube just now, again, we always appreciate if you can find it in yourself to hit that subscribe button to help us grow the channel. We passed 500 subscribers last week, so that was a nice wee milestone for us, and we're very appreciative of everybody who's signed up so far.
In my absence, I see. Yeah.
Yes, a coincidence, I'm sure, and nothing to do with me either. We should just have the guest guys on. It's just like Craig and Matty do these, and we could just take a back seat. I think it would probably do wonders for the channel.
I think it probably would. It was also stop me from just like waffling internally about everything. So if I mean, there's people out here who've been subscribed since the beginning who faithfully sit here and watch these videos and have to put up with me waffling, and so just apologies and thank you. You're a stellar bunch of people. And hopefully I can cut the waffling down. There is an internal review going on in the background with how much I waffle in the videos, and hopefully we'll have some answers soon about how we can cut that down.
Yeah. I think it's just what years of covering Hibs does to a man. So we'll see. We'll park it there for today, folks. Thanks to everybody who's joined us, and we will see you again soon. Cheers.